The great chamber of the Galactic Council gleamed under artificial stars. Representatives from 300 worlds sat in their designated sections, each species arranged by age and importance. At the highest tier, where the light seemed brightest, the elder races held court. The Zenarii sat in meditation poses, their translucent skin shifting through colors that reflected their philosophical moods. The Quellar arranged themselves in artistic formations, every movement a calculated display of grace. The Thandros floated in precise geometric patterns, their crystalline bodies humming with mathematical certainty. Below them, in descending rings, sat the younger species. And near the bottom, in a section that received practical lighting rather than the dramatic spotlight above, sat the human delegation. Victoria Chen had represented humanity for 23 years. She had gray hair now, pulled back in a simple bun. Her suit was clean and professional, but unremarkable. She sat with 5 other human representatives, and they all shared the same quality. They looked tired, not exhausted, just worn in the way that people who actually work for a living always look. Today was important. Today, humanity was formally requesting a seat on the High Council. After 250 years of service, after building the infrastructure that kept 300 worlds functioning, after doing the work that no one else wanted to do, they were asking for recognition. The petition had been filed 6 months ago. The debate had been scheduled and rescheduled 3 times. Finally, today, the vote would happen. Victoria watched as the Zenarii Prime Speaker rose. His name was Thessian, and he was over 400 years old. He moved with the slow certainty of someone who had never been rushed, never been told to hurry up because a pipe was bursting or a patient was dying or a reactor was overheating. "We have considered the human petition," Thessian said, his voice resonating through translation devices in every language spoken in the chamber. "We have examined their service record. We have reviewed their contributions to council space." Victoria felt a small spark of hope. Maybe this time would be different. "Humanity has indeed proven themselves capable in many practical matters," Thessian continued. "Their efficiency in managing waste systems is remarkable. Their dedication to emergency services has saved many lives. Their willingness to perform tasks that other species find beneath their station has been valuable to our civilization." The hope began to fade. Victoria knew that tone. She had heard it 1,000 times before. "However," Thessian said, and there it was, the word that ended everything. "However, the High Council requires more than practical skill. It requires philosophical depth. It requires cultural sophistication. It requires a species that has moved beyond the immediate and physical to embrace the abstract and eternal. After careful consideration, we must conclude that humanity, while useful, has not yet demonstrated the maturity required for such responsibility." The vote was called. 300 worlds voted. Humanity received 47 votes in favor, 253 against. Victoria stood slowly. She walked to the speaking platform with steady steps. Around her, the other representatives were already moving on to the next item of business. The human petition had been denied. With FAR, Time to discuss more important matters. "Thank you for your consideration," Victoria said into the microphone. Her voice was calm. "We understand your decision." She returned to her seat. The Quellar representative was already presenting a proposal for a new art installation that would span 3 solar systems. The cost was astronomical. The vote to approve it would be quick and unanimous. After all, art was important. Art elevated civilization. Art was worthy of resources and attention. The chamber continued its business. No one noticed when the human delegation quietly gathered their materials and left. 3 days later, Victoria sent a message to every human working in council space. There were 18 million of them, spread across 300 worlds. They worked in water treatment plants and power stations. They staffed hospitals and schools. They maintained the computers and fixed the machines. They grew the food and delivered it. They cleaned the streets and managed the waste. They did everything that needed doing. Everything that kept billions of beings alive and comfortable. The message was simple. It's time to come home. Within a week, humanity issued their official statement to the Council. The language was diplomatic and professional. They thanked the Council for the opportunity to serve. They announced that all human workers would be withdrawing from Council space within 6 months. All contracts would be fulfilled or properly terminated with appropriate notice. All systems would be documented and handed over to Council personnel. Everything would be done according to regulations and laws. There were no accusations, no anger, no threats, just a simple, clear announcement. Humanity was leaving. The initial reaction from the Council was minimal. A few representatives sent polite acknowledgement messages. Most ignored it entirely. After all, there were always workers. If the humans left, others would fill those positions. The Council had existed for 3,000 years. It would adapt. On Zenari Prime, in the cultural district where philosophers gathered to debate the nature of existence, no one paid attention to the small human team that maintained the waste processing station. The humans showed up every day, did their work, and left. They were invisible, part of the background, like the air or the light. When the team leader, a man named Marcus, announced they would be leaving in 3 months, his Zenari supervisor barely acknowledged it. "Very well," the supervisor said, not looking up from his meditation on the concept of transient permanence. "Submit the proper documentation." Rome. Marcus did. He also submitted detailed manuals on how to maintain the system. He offered to train replacement workers. His supervisor waved away the offer. "We will manage. These are simple mechanical processes, certainly not beyond our capabilities." On Thandros Station, the power grid maintenance crews were human. The Thandros could calculate energy flow patterns to 17 decimal places. They could optimize distribution algorithms in seconds. But when something broke, when a physical junction needed replacement or a cable needed repairing, they called the humans. When the human crews announced their departure, the Thandros were unconcerned. They would automate everything. Their calculations showed it was entirely feasible. They didn't need human intuition or experience. Mathematics was universal and perfect. On Queller agricultural worlds, human farmhands tended the vast fields that fed billions. The Queller designed beautiful irrigation systems and aesthetically pleasing crop arrangements. But they didn't want to walk the fields in the heat, checking plants for disease, adjusting systems by hand when sensors failed. That was human work. When the humans gave their notice, the Queller Artistic Council decided to redesign the entire agricultural system as a grand artistic project. It would be beautiful and efficient. They would demonstrate that art and function could merge perfectly. They didn't need humans doing crude manual labor in their fields. Across council space, the same pattern repeated. 18 million humans began packing their belongings, finishing their contracts, documenting their work, and booking passage home. They did it quietly, professionally, without drama. The council barely noticed. The Great Chamber continued its debates. The elder races continued their philosophies and art and mathematical pursuits. The younger species continued trying to prove themselves worthy of advancement. And slowly, quietly, the people who actually kept everything running began to leave. Victoria Chen stood in her quarters on the last night before her own departure. She looked out at the glittering expanse of council space. 300 worlds. Billions of beings. A civilization that had stood for millennia. It was beautiful. It was sophisticated. It was going to learn a very hard lesson. She didn't feel angry. She felt sad. They had tried to warn the council. They had tried to explain that a civilization needed more than grand ideas. It needed people willing to do the unglamorous work. It needed to value all contributions, not just the ones that sounded impressive. But the council hadn't wanted to listen. They had wanted servants, not partners. Workers, not equals. Now they would have neither. Victoria picked up her single bag and walked to the transport. Behind her, the council chamber continued its session, debating the philosophical implications of temporal ethics. The lights stayed on. The air stayed fresh. The water stayed clean. For now, the humans were leaving. And in their absence, the council was about to discover what actually held civilization together. 3 months after the human announcement, Thessian was meditating in his garden when the smell hit him. It was terrible, rising from the streets below his tower like a physical force. The smell of sewage, raw and overpowering, spreading through the cultural district of Zenarii Prime. He broke his meditation, something he rarely did, and contacted the city maintenance office. "There appears to be a malfunction in the waste systems," he said calmly. "Please address it immediately." The response took longer than usual. When it came, the voice on the other end sounded stressed. "We're aware of the problem, Prime Speaker. The processing station in your district has suffered a complete failure. We're working to resolve it. How long will this take?" There was a pause. "We don't know." Thessian was surprised. The waste systems had never failed before. They simply worked, quietly and invisibly, as they had for centuries. "Contact the maintenance team," he said. "The maintenance team was human," the voice replied. "They left 6 weeks ago. We're trying to understand their manuals now." The smell continued for 3 days. The great philosophers of Zenarii Prime, beings who contemplated the infinite and discussed the nature of reality, were driven from their homes by something as basic as their own waste. When the system was finally repaired by emergency engineers brought in from another world, the solution was temporary. The engineers admitted they didn't fully understand the system. They had fixed the immediate break, but they couldn't maintain it long term. On Thandros Station, the power failure happened during peak hours. 17 districts went dark, all at once. 300,000. Thandros suddenly found themselves in blackness. Their perfect mathematical environments disrupted. The Thandros Emergency Response Team ran their calculations. They identified the problem within minutes. A critical junction in the power grid had failed. The solution was mathematically clear. Replace the junction, reroute the power flow, restore the grid. But when they went to the junction, they discovered that mathematical understanding and physical repair were different things. The junction was buried in a maze of cables and conduits. The replacement process required someone to actually climb into the access tunnel, disconnect old systems, and install new ones. It required hands-on work in cramped, uncomfortable conditions. The Thandros stood at the access point, their crystalline bodies not designed for such spaces, their minds not trained for such work. They had always called the humans for this. The humans had always come, usually within minutes, and fixed whatever needed fixing. But there were no humans anymore. They tried to do it themselves. It took 18 hours instead of the usual 2. They made mistakes. They had to recalculate. 3 of them suffered damage to their crystalline structures from the cramped conditions. When power was finally restored, the grid was running at 70% efficiency because they hadn't been able to properly configure all the systems. The Thandros emergency coordinator sent a message to the human embassy. The response was polite but firm. "Our contracts have been fulfilled. We suggest you train your own personnel or hire contractors from other species." But other species didn't want to do this work either. The Thandros tried offering massive salaries for power maintenance positions. They received 3 applications, all from species even younger and less established than humans. And those applicants wanted the high salary without the uncomfortable working conditions. On Queller, the food situation was becoming serious. The artistic redesign of the agricultural system had seemed perfect on paper. Beautiful, efficient. But the crops were failing in 12 different regions. The Queller Agricultural Council couldn't understand it. Their sensors showed everything was within acceptable parameters. The irrigation systems were functioning. The soil composition was correct. Everything should be working. But plants were dying anyway. A young Queller named Sivienne, who had actually spent time watching the human farmhands work, tried to explain the problem to her elders. The humans didn't just follow the sensors, she said. They walked the fields. They looked at the plants. They noticed things before the sensors did. They saw patterns. We missed. Nonsense, her supervisor replied. Sensors are objective. They provide perfect data. Human observation is subjective and unreliable. But the crops are dying. Then the sensors need adjustment, or the crop varieties need changing. This is a technical problem with technical solutions. But the technical solutions didn't work. The crops continued to fail. Food shipments to other Queller worlds began to slow. For the first time in 8 generations, Queller citizens experienced empty shelves in markets. Not everywhere, not completely, but enough to notice, enough to worry. The council convened an emergency session 2 months later. It was supposed to address the increasing number of infrastructure problems across council space. But the session quickly devolved into confusion. The waste processing issues on Zenerii Prime are a local problem, one representative argued. They should handle it locally. The power grid instability on Thandros Station is a technical matter, another said. It requires engineering expertise, not council intervention. The agricultural difficulties on Queller worlds are temporary, a third insisted. They're implementing new systems. There will be an adjustment period. Victoria Chen, who had delayed her departure to finalize diplomatic paperwork, watched the session from the human gallery. She wasn't scheduled to speak, but the council speaker recognized her. Ambassador Chen, perhaps you have insights into these difficulties? They seem to involve areas where humans previously worked. AC. Y. 14. Victoria stood. She looked at the assembled representatives, at the elder races sitting in their places of honor, at the younger species scrambling to prove themselves worthy. We documented everything, she said simply. We provided manuals, procedures, training materials. We followed every protocol for proper transition. We even offered to stay longer to train replacements, though few accepted. These problems you're experiencing aren't because we left incorrectly. They're because the work we did was more complex than you realized. Surely these are simple tasks, Thessian said, a hint of irritation in his voice. Mechanical processes. Routine maintenance. These should not be causing civilization-wide disruptions. If they were simple, Victoria replied quietly, you wouldn't be having this emergency session. She sat down. The chamber was silent for a moment. Then the arguments resumed. The elder races insisted that the younger species should handle these matters. The younger species insisted they lacked the resources or training. Everyone agreed that offering massive salaries should solve the problem. No one wanted to acknowledge the deeper issue. A delegation was sent to the human embassy the next day. 3 representatives, led by a Queller diplomat named Eresh. They were received politely in a nearly empty building. Most human diplomatic staff had already departed. The council wishes to renegotiate, Eresh said. We're prepared to offer improved compensation for human workers. Better housing, better benefits, better working conditions. The human embassy's deputy director, a man named James, listened patiently. And the seat on the High Council? That remains under discussion. But surely you understand that such a significant decision requires time and careful consideration. We've been in council space for 250 years, James said. "How much time do you need?" "The compensation package we're offering is extremely generous." "We're not interested." Eresh was surprised. "You haven't even seen the numbers." "We don't need to. We're going home. We're rebuilding our own worlds, focusing on our own civilization. We spent 2.5 centuries maintaining yours. Now we're going to take care of ourselves." "But who will do this work?" James looked at Eresh for a long moment. "That," he said finally, "is no longer our problem. You have 300 worlds. You have species that can calculate energy flows to 17 decimal places, and species that can create art spanning solar systems. Surely you can figure out how to fix a power junction or maintain a waste system. Those tasks are beneath us." "Yes," James said quietly. The delegation left with nothing. Their report to the council was uncomfortable. The humans weren't angry. They weren't demanding. They were simply done. And that, somehow, made it worse. Across council space, more problems appeared. Life support systems on space stations began showing irregularities. Hospital equipment started malfunctioning more frequently. Transport systems experienced delays. None of it catastrophic. None of it civilization ending. Just a steady accumulation of small failures. The council tried to hire contractors from outside their space, but the reputation of the work, the lack of respect for those who did it, had spread. Few were interested, and those who were demanded astronomical fees. They tried to automate everything. But automation required maintenance too, and the humans had been the ones maintaining the automation. They tried to train their own citizens. But training took time, and their cultures had spent millennia teaching their people that such work was beneath them. Few volunteered. Fewer stayed once they understood what the work actually involved. And through it all, the humans continued their quiet departure. They finished their contracts, handed over their documentation, and went home. No drama, no speeches, no threats. Just the steady, quiet withdrawal of the people who had been holding everything together. The cracks were showing, and they were spreading. By month 5, the hospital on Frontier Station 7 was closing. Not because of a disaster. Not because of war or plague. It was closing because no one could keep it running. Dr. Kelthara was a Quellar physician, one of the finest surgeons in council space. Her hands could perform procedures that seemed impossible. She had saved thousands of lives. But she stood in her office now, looking at the closure order, and felt completely helpless. "We still have patients," she said to the station administrator. 37 beings who need ongoing care. Where will they go?" The administrator, a Thandros named Coordinate 7, displayed calculations on his surface. "The nearest facility with capacity is 42 light-years away. Transport can be arranged. I-2. Some of them can't be moved. Their conditions are too unstable. Then we must stabilize them here before the closure." "With what staff?" Kelthara's voice rose, frustration breaking through her usual calm. "We lost our nursing staff 3 months ago. All humans. We lost our medical technicians last month. Also humans. We lost our orderlies, our equipment maintenance staff, our life support technicians. All humans. I can perform surgery, Coordinate 7, but I cannot run this entire hospital alone. We attempted to hire replacements. You offered high salaries for jobs no one wants to do. Jobs our cultures have taught us to look down on for generations. Do you know what nursing requires? It requires checking on patients every few hours, even through the night. It requires cleaning bodies and changing bedding. It requires sitting with the dying and comforting the scared. It requires patience and compassion and a willingness to do things that are not glamorous or respected. Coordinate 7 processed this. These tasks are essential. Yes. And we've spent 3,000 years pretending they weren't. We've spent 3,000 years letting humans do them while we congratulated ourselves on our superior culture. The hospital closed 2 weeks later. The patients who could be moved were transported to other facilities, straining those systems. The patients who couldn't be moved received the best care Kelthara could provide alone until they either recovered or died. 3 didn't make it. Deaths that wouldn't have happened if the hospital had been properly staffed. Kelthara filed her report with the Council Medical Authority. She didn't expect anything to change. She was right. On the agricultural world of Quellar 5, the crop failures had spread. What started in 12 regions was now affecting 60% of the arable land. The beautiful irrigation systems, designed to aesthetic perfection, were proving too complex to maintain properly. The sensor networks, without regular calibration and physical inspection, were providing increasingly inaccurate data. Sivienne had been promoted to head of agricultural operations, not because she had proven herself worthy, but because no one else wanted the job. She was young, only 97 years old, and willing to do what her elders wouldn't. She walked the fields herself now, trying to see what the sensors missed. She found a human agricultural manual in one of the abandoned dormitories. It was handwritten, notes added by multiple workers over years. Check the soil by hand. Every week. Sensors drift. Your hands don't. Look for insects on the underside of leaves. Sensors can't see them until it's too late. When you water, watch how the water flows. It tells you things the moisture readings miss. Simple advice. Practical advice. Advice that came from actually doing the work. Sivienne tried to implement it. She trained teams to walk the fields, to check plants by hand, to pay attention to things that couldn't be measured by machines. But it was hard. Her people weren't used to physical labor. They tired easily. They complained about the heat, the dirt, the repetitive nature of the work. And there weren't enough of them. The humans had fielded thousands of farmhands across Quellar 5. Sivienne had managed to recruit 230 volunteers. Most quit within a month. The food situation across Quellar worlds was becoming critical. Not famine, not yet, but genuine shortages. Rationing was implemented in several cities. Protests erupted. The Quellar Council tried to explain that they were working on solutions, that new automated systems were being designed, that everything would be resolved soon. But plants grow on their own schedule, not council schedules. And dead plants don't produce food, no matter how many promises are made. On Zenari Prime, the philosophical society that had debated in the cultural district for 800 years was relocating. The waste system problems had never been fully resolved. Emergency repairs kept the situation from being catastrophic, but the smell lingered. The elegant meditation gardens were tainted. The grand halls, where deep thoughts had echoed, now smelled of sewage. Thessian watched the society pack their artifacts and books. He felt something he rarely experienced: shame. "We should have listened," one of his colleagues said quietly. "Ambassador Chen tried to tell us." "She did," Thessian agreed. "We dismissed her warnings. We believed that practical matters were beneath our concern. We believed that the work of maintenance was simple, unworthy of respect. And now we're being driven from our home by our own waste." Thessian had no response. What could he say? They had spent centuries contemplating the nature of existence, the patterns of consciousness, the structure of reality itself. But they hadn't thought about sewage systems. And now, the sewage systems were winning. Across council space, similar stories played out. A water treatment plant on Thandros 3 failed completely, contaminating the water supply for 6 million beings. An emergency response fleet took 9 hours to respond to a distress call that should have been answered in 1 because the logistics coordination was falling apart. A power station on a colony world suffered a cascade failure that left the entire planet dark for 32 hours. Each incident alone was manageable. But they weren't happening alone. They were happening everywhere, constantly, accumulating faster than they could be addressed. The council emergency sessions became daily occurrences. Representatives shouted at each other, blaming, accusing, demanding solutions that no one had. The elder races insisted that the younger species should handle these problems. The younger species pointed out that they lacked the resources, training, and most importantly, the willingness of their populations to do the work. We need to force compliance, one representative suggested. Make it a requirement. Every citizen must perform a certain amount of infrastructure work. The idea was voted down immediately. The council couldn't force its citizens to do work they found demeaning. The cultural resistance was too strong. We need to increase automation further, another suggested. We've tried. Automation requires maintenance. Maintenance requires workers. Workers require cultures that respect the work. We don't have that. Then we need to change our cultures. The chamber fell silent. That was the unthinkable suggestion. Change cultures that were thousands of years old? Abandon the philosophies and artistic traditions and mathematical purities that defined entire civilizations? Become more like the humans? The vote on that proposal wasn't even called. The silence was answer enough. A delegation went to Earth. Not a casual request this time, but an official mission with representatives from all the elder races. They were granted permission to land. Granted a meeting with human leadership. Victoria Chen was there, though she had officially retired. She sat with the current human diplomatic corps and listened as the council delegation presented their offer. Significant concessions on working conditions. Seats on regional councils. A promise to seriously consider a high council seat within the next 50 years. Massive financial compensation. When they finished, Victoria asked a simple question. Why? The lead delegate, Thessian himself, seemed confused. Why are we offering this? Because we need your help. The situation is becoming critical. No. Victoria said. Why do you need our help? You have 300 member worlds. You have species with incredible abilities. You have resources beyond measure. Why can't you do this work yourselves? Thessian struggled to answer. Finally, he said, because we don't know how. You could learn. That would take years, decades perhaps. We don't have that time. We spent 250 years serving your council. We learned your languages, adapted to your cultures, did work you considered beneath you. We had patience. Why don't you? Formar. Lifeling, our one-targs, our one-targs, our one-targs, because our civilizations are collapsing. Victoria nodded slowly. Yes, they are. And that's not our fault. We gave you 6 months' notice. We provided documentation. We offered training. We fulfilled every legal and ethical obligation. What's happening now is not because we left. It's because you built a civilization on a foundation of disrespect. You created cultures where necessary work was shameful, where the people who did that work were looked down on, where it was better to let things fall apart than to get your hands dirty. We were wrong, Thessian said quietly. It was the first time Victoria had ever heard him admit fault. We understand that now. We've learned. Have you? Or are you just desperate? The question hung in the air. The delegation couldn't answer it. Victoria stood. We'll send help. Not because you deserve it, but because people are suffering, and we can't ignore that. But it won't be like before. We won't be your servants. We won't do the work while you take credit. We'll teach you. We'll show you how. And you'll learn to do it yourselves. Or you'll fall. That choice is yours. The delegation left with a partial victory. Humans would return to council space. But everything had changed. The teachers and engineers who went back to council worlds found a different reception than before. The arrogance was gone, replaced by desperation and, In some cases, genuine humility. But in many places, the old attitudes remained, just hidden beneath politeness. The galaxy was learning. Slowly. Painfully. Some would adapt. Some would fall. And humanity, withdrawn to their own space, watched to see which would be which. 7 months after the human withdrawal began, the Great Council chamber was half empty. Not because representatives chose not to attend, but because many worlds could no longer afford to maintain diplomatic missions. The resources that had once flowed freely to support grand debates and philosophical discussions were now desperately needed at home. Thessian looked at the empty seats and felt the weight of failure. He had led the council for 47 years. He had guided debates on ethics, consciousness, and the nature of civilization itself. He had been respected, even revered, across 300 worlds. Now he presided over the collapse of everything he had helped build. The session began with reports. Each one was worse than the last. Thandros 7 is requesting emergency evacuation, one representative reported. Their main power grid has failed completely. Life support is running on backup systems that won't last more than 3 weeks. They cannot repair the primary systems. They lack the trained personnel. This percent. They lack the trained personnel. Queller 12 is experiencing food riots. Another said. Agricultural production has dropped 73%. They've requested emergency supplies from neighboring worlds. But those worlds are facing their own shortages. Zenarii Secondary is under quarantine, a third reported. A disease outbreak that should have been contained by standard medical protocols has spread uncontrolled. Their hospitals lack staff. 14,000 dead so far. 1. The reports continued. Station evacuations, infrastructure collapses, supply chain failures, social unrest. Each problem feeding into others, creating cascading failures that no one seemed able to stop. We need to consider military options, Representative Kelvar, of the Thandros said. His crystalline surface was flickering with agitation. Humanity has the skilled workers we need. If they won't return voluntarily, we must compel them. The chamber erupted in argument. Some supported the idea. Many opposed it. But the debate revealed something troubling. They were seriously considering forcing human labor. Thessian let the argument rage for several minutes before calling for order. Let us be clear about what we're discussing, he said. Representative Kelvar is proposing that we send military forces to human space to demand, under threat of force, that they provide us with workers. Does anyone see the profound irony here? The chamber fell silent. We denied them a seat on the High Council because they lacked philosophical maturity, Thessian continued. And now, faced with the consequences of our own arrogance, we're considering slavery. Please, someone explain to me how this demonstrates our superior wisdom. Kelvar's surface flickered darker. Not slavery. Reparations. They left us in crisis. They should help repair the damage. They left us after fulfilling their contracts and providing proper notice, a younger representative countered. They followed every law. They violated no agreements. The crisis we face is our own creation. Even so, Kelvar insisted. We need them. What does it matter if we're right or wrong? Our civilizations are dying. Eresh, the Queller diplomat who had negotiated with the humans, spoke up. It matters because we can't force them. I've reviewed the military situation. Humanity maintained our defense networks. They built our ships, staffed our logistics, maintained our weapons systems. Does anyone here actually know if our fleet could reach Earth in operational condition? The silence that followed was telling. I contacted our military commanders, Eresh continued. They estimate that 60% of our fleet is experiencing maintenance issues. Without human technical staff, they cannot guarantee that ships will reach their destinations, let alone be effective in combat. And that assumes the human defense networks, which they designed and built, wouldn't simply stop our ships before they arrived. We could hire mercenaries, someone suggested. With what payment? Our economies are strained, our production is falling. Our currency is losing value as confidence in council stability decreases. What mercenary force would accept payment from a civilization that might not exist in a year? The debate dissolved into despair. The elder races, who had debated philosophy for millennia, found themselves unable to solve practical problems. The younger races, who had aspired to join the ranks of the elite, found themselves struggling just to survive. A Zenari junior representative named Ilara, who had only held her position for 3 years, stood to speak. She was young, barely 200 years old, and her voice shook slightly. Perhaps we're asking the wrong questions. We keep asking how to force humans to help us, or how to hire others to do the work. But we never ask why we can't do it ourselves. We can't do it ourselves. We've been over this, an elder representative said dismissively. Our cultures are not suited to such labor. It would take generations to change. Then maybe we need to change, Ilara said, her voice growing stronger. Our cultures have brought us to the edge of collapse. Maybe our cultures are wrong. The chamber erupted again. The suggestion was blasphemy. Zenari philosophy, refined over 5,000 years, was wrong. Quellar artistic tradition, the pride of their civilization, was wrong. Thandros mathematical purity, the foundation of their identity, was wrong. But Ilara pressed on. I've been to the evacuated human quarters in my city. I've read their training manuals. I've watched their recorded instructions. The work they did wasn't simple. It required intelligence, intuition, experience. But more than that, it required something we lack. It required them to believe that the work mattered, that it had dignity, that doing it well was worthy of pride. Physical labor has no dignity. An elder scoffed. Abstract thought, artistic creation, mathematical purity, these have dignity. Manual work is for lesser beings. Then we are lesser beings, Ilara said flatly, because we're going to die rather than learn to maintain our own waste systems. The words hit like a physical blow. The chamber fell completely silent. Thessian looked at Ilara with something like respect. What do you propose? We must start learning. Now. Not all of us. Not immediately. But some of us. Send volunteers to human space. Not to ask them to come back, but to ask them to teach us. Let them train us in their worlds, where we can't rely on our old assumptions. Let us learn humility before we learn plumbing. This would be humiliating, someone said. More humiliating than what we're experiencing now? Ilara countered. More humiliating than begging humans to return? More humiliating than watching our civilizations collapse because we're too proud to fix a water pipe? Nunder. I have manwas. The debate raged for hours. In the end, no vote was taken. But something had shifted. The unthinkable was being thought. The unsayable was being said. Over the following weeks, a small number of younger council members contacted human authorities. They asked permission to come to human worlds. Not as diplomats, not as dignitaries, but as students. They wanted to learn the skills humans knew. The response from humanity was cautious but positive. Small training programs were established. 20 Zenari, 30 Quellar, 45 Thandros, and representatives from a dozen other species traveled to human worlds to learn. They learned to maintain waste systems, to repair power grids, to tend crops, to care for patients. They learned in human schools alongside human students, treated not as special or important, but as people who needed to learn. It was humiliating. Many quit within weeks, unable to accept the reality of the work. But some stayed. Some learned. Some began to understand. Back in council space, the situation continued to deteriorate. 2 more worlds requested evacuation assistance. Several major stations were abandoned. Food shortages became famines in some regions. The elder races, still debating philosophy, were learning that abstract wisdom couldn't fill empty stomachs or restore power to darkened cities. Meanwhile, long-range sensors were picking up interesting data from human space. Human worlds were thriving. Their activity levels were higher than ever. They were building new stations, expanding colonies, developing technologies. They had turned inward, focusing on their own growth, and they were flourishing. A detailed analysis of Earth's orbital traffic showed something interesting. Massive construction projects, new shipyards, expanded manufacturing. Humanity was building something, and they were building it fast. Some council members worried it was a military buildup, but intelligence suggested otherwise. The humans were building infrastructure, habitats, farms, factories, schools. They were expanding their civilization rapidly, doing for themselves what they had once done for the council. They were doing it efficiently, they were doing it well, and they were doing it without asking anyone's permission or seeking anyone's validation. A Thandros analyst named Coordinate 12 compiled a report that circulated through council space. It was simple but devastating. Human civilization is growing at 4.7% annually. Council civilization is contracting at 6.2% annually. If current trends continue, within 30 years, human space will surpass council space in every measurable metric: population, productivity, technological advancement, and territorial control. The species that had dismissed humanity as useful but unrefined were facing an uncomfortable truth. The servants were becoming the masters, not through conquest or domination, but through simple competence. In the council chamber, Thessian read the report and felt the full weight of their collective failure. They had possessed wisdom, they had believed, but humans had possessed something more valuable: practical knowledge and the humility to use it. The question now was whether the council could learn that humility before it was too late. For some worlds, it already was. For others, time was running out. And humanity, quietly building their own future, watched and waited to see if the council would learn the lesson they had been trying to teach for 250 years: that all work has dignity, and civilization rests not on those who philosophize about it, but on those who maintain it. 18 months after humanity's withdrawal, Victoria Chen stood in the observation deck of the human diplomatic vessel approaching Earth. She was 83 years old now, officially retired, but the council had specifically requested her presence for this meeting. She looked down at her homeworld and felt something she hadn't felt in decades: pride. Earth gleamed. The orbital rings sparkled with activity. New stations dotted the space around Luna. The construction platforms that had been started when the withdrawal began were now massive structures, building ships and habitats at a pace that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. Humanity had come home and remembered what they were capable of when they worked for themselves. Behind her, the council delegation waited nervously. Thessian was there, older and more tired than she remembered. Eresh, the Queller diplomat. Coordinate 7, the Thandros who had closed the hospital on Frontier Station 7. And Ilara, the young Zanari who had spoken truth to power in the council chamber. They were here to make one final request, or perhaps one final plea. The shuttle landed at the diplomatic complex outside of Geneva. The Human Welcoming Committee was professional, but not warm. There were no grand ceremonies, no speeches about the historic nature of the meeting, just a simple escort to a conference room where human leadership waited. The human negotiating team included former ambassadors, current ministers, and several people the council delegates didn't recognize at first. Then Victoria realized who they were: former workers. A woman who had maintained waste systems on Zenari Prime, a man who had been a farmhand on Quellar 5, a hospital orderly from Thandros Station. Humanity had brought the people who actually did the work to this negotiation. The message was clear. Thessian spoke first. He was humble now, in a way Victoria had never seen. We come to ask for help, not as employers, not as superiors, as students, as beings who have learned, too late, that we were wrong. The human foreign minister, a stern woman named Sarah Okonkwo, gestured for him to continue. The council is failing, Thessian said simply. 67 member worlds have collapsed completely. Another 112 are experiencing severe instability. The rest are struggling. We face cascading failures we cannot stop. We've tried to train our own people. Some have learned. Not enough. Not fast enough. We're asking if humanity would be willing to send teachers, not workers, teachers, to help us learn what you know. You tried this already, Sarah said. You sent a delegation months ago. We sent teachers. They reported back that many of your worlds treated them with contempt, that their students quit when the work got difficult, that your cultures actively resisted learning. That was true in many places, Ilara spoke up. I was one of the students who came here to learn. I spent 6 months working in human facilities. I learned to maintain water treatment systems. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. And not because of the technical difficulty. It was hard because I had to admit that I had been wrong my entire life, that my culture's values were flawed, that I had looked down on beings who were better than me. She paused, her color shifting to shades of shame and determination. But I learned. And when I returned home, I began teaching others. Not the elder generation. They're too set in their ways. But the young. I have 300 students now on Zanari Prime. We maintain the waste systems in 4 districts. It's not enough. It's nowhere near enough. But it's a start. Why should we help you? The question came from Marcus, the former waste system technician. You treated us like servants. You denied us basic respect for 250 years. You refused us a voice in decisions that affected our lives. Now, you're facing the consequences of your choices, and you want us to save you from them. Why should we? The question hung in the air. The council delegates struggled to answer. Finally, Thessian said, you shouldn't. By any measure of justice, you should let us fail. We earned this fate. But we're asking anyway, not because we deserve help, but because millions of innocent beings are suffering for mistakes their leaders made. The Zenerai child who is hungry because crops are failing did not vote to deny you a council seat. The Thandros worker, trying to learn new skills despite cultural resistance, did not treat you with contempt. The Queller nurse staying at her post even as her hospital crumbles around her did not dismiss your contributions. He looked at Victoria directly. You told me once that you weren't asking for a council seat because you craved power. You were asking because you saw what was coming. Because you tried to warn us. We didn't listen. But you were right. And now I'm asking, were you trying to warn us because you wanted to gloat when we failed? Or because you genuinely cared about the civilization we had built together? Victoria was silent for a long moment. Then she said, we'll help, but there are conditions. Anything. First, the High Council will be reformed. Humans will have 3 seats. Not because we demand them, but because a council that makes decisions affecting workers needs workers' voices. Thessian nodded immediately. Agreed. Bug. Second, you will implement educational reforms across council space. Every species, every world, will teach their children that all work has dignity, that the person who fixes water pipes is as valuable as the person who writes philosophy, that practical knowledge and abstract wisdom are both necessary. That will take generations to achieve, Coordinate 7 said. Cultural change is slow. Yes, Victoria agreed. It is. But it starts with commitment. We'll help you develop curricula. We'll provide teachers for your teachers. But the commitment must come from you. Agreed, Thessian said. Third, and this is not negotiable, the humans who return to council space as teachers will be treated with respect. They will be paid appropriately. They will be honored for their knowledge. If we hear of any teacher being mistreated, being looked down on, being dismissed because your old attitudes are resurfacing, all our support ends immediately. Agreed. Sarah leaned forward. You understand what you're agreeing to? You're agreeing to fundamentally change your civilizations, to abandon values you've held for millennia, to become, in many ways. Yes, Thessian said quietly. We understand, and we accept it, because the alternative is to die proud and cultured and completely collapsed. Our values brought us to the edge of extinction. We must change or fall. The negotiations continued for 3 days. The details were complex, the agreements detailed and specific, but the core was simple. Humanity would help the Council learn to help itself. A month later, the first wave of human teachers departed for Council space. 5,000 men and women, volunteers all, who understood they were going to places that had treated their people with contempt. But they went anyway, because that was what humans did. They showed up. They did the work. They helped, even when it wasn't appreciated. But this time was different. This time, when they arrived on Council Worlds, they found students waiting who genuinely wanted to learn. Not everywhere, not all worlds, but enough. Young beings who saw the old ways failing and were willing to try something new. On Zenarii Prime, Ilara's program expanded. Her students learned not just technical skills but the philosophy behind them. They learned that maintaining systems that kept people alive and healthy was not a lesser calling than contemplating abstract truths. They learned that doing something well, whatever that something was, had its own beauty. On Queller Worlds, young farmers walked the fields with human teachers, learning to see what sensors missed. They learned patience and attention to detail. They learned that art could be found in a well-tended crop just as much as in a sculpture or painting. On Thandros stations, students learned that mathematics was most beautiful when applied to real problems. That, calculating the perfect power flow, was meaningless if no one knew how to actually implement it. That theory and practice needed each other. The changes were slow. The old attitudes persisted in many places. Some worlds refused help entirely, choosing to cling to their traditional values, even as they collapsed. The Council was fracturing, some worlds embracing the new reality, while others rejected it. But humanity didn't force anything. They taught those who wanted to learn and left the others to make their own choices. 2 years after the withdrawal, the Council Chamber met to formalize the new structure. The High Council now had 21 seats instead of 9. Humans held 3. But more significantly, other species who had traditionally been excluded, the workers, the young, the practical-minded, now had voices. Victoria attended the ceremony but did not take a seat herself. She was too old, she said. She recommended younger humans who had actually done the work. A water treatment engineer named Sarah Kim, a hospital administrator named James Okafor, a logistics coordinator named Maria Santos. People who understood the reality of keeping civilization running. Thessian, in his role as ceremonial elder, welcomed the new council members. This is not the council we had, he said. That council has failed and will not return. This is something new. Something built on the understanding that wisdom comes in many forms. That the person who ensures clean water for a city has wisdom. That the person who keeps hospitals running has wisdom. That the person who maintains the systems we all depend on has wisdom. He paused, looking at the new council members, at the mix of elder races and humans, and younger species who had never expected to sit in these seats. We believed that civilization was built on philosophy and art and pure thought. We were wrong. Civilization is built on the foundation of daily work, done well, by people who believe that work matters. We forgot this truth. We dismissed those who remembered it, and we nearly destroyed ourselves. Some of our worlds have fallen. Some are falling still. Some will not survive. This is the price of our arrogance. But some will endure. Those that do will be different. Better, perhaps. More humble, certainly. And if we survive, it will be because we learned, finally, to respect the people who actually keep the lights on. The session concluded. The new council began its work, not with grand philosophical debates, but with practical discussions of infrastructure repair, educational reform, and economic stabilization. Victoria watched from the gallery, satisfied. Humanity hadn't conquered the council. They hadn't forced change. They had simply withdrawn, quietly and completely, and let the council face the consequences of its own values. Some had learned. Some hadn't. That was their choice. Outside the station, human ships moved through council space again, but not as servants, as partners, as teachers, as equals. Humanity had withdrawn quietly, leaving the council to confront the outcome of centuries of misplaced pride. Some had confronted it and changed. Some had confronted it and refused to change. Some were still confronting it, struggling to decide who they wanted to be. But humanity was no longer waiting for the council's approval. They had remembered their worth, rebuilt their civilization, and reclaimed their pride. And in the quiet spaces where the real work of civilization happened, the water treatment, plants and power stations, the farms and hospitals, the maintenance shafts and repair bays, a new generation was learning an old truth: that all work has dignity. That civilization rests on those who maintain it, and that the people willing to do necessary work, regardless of recognition or reward, are the foundation upon which everything else stands. The humans had withdrawn. They had confronted the outcome themselves and chosen to survive. Now the council had to make the same choice. Some would, some wouldn't. And humanity would help those who asked, teach those who wanted to learn, and leave the rest to their fate. Because that, in the end, was what it meant to be worthy of respect, not demanding it, not enforcing it, just living with quiet dignity, doing the work that mattered, and letting the results speak for themselves.